Here.
Council members Bagley.
Here.
Finley.
Here.
Levison.
Here.
Samore. Witt.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Okay, may we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, we'll go right into public invited to be heard. You have 3 minutes. If you would please state your name and address. And we'll start with Chris Porzuchek, followed by Gene Ditzler. Name is Chris Porzuchek, 12624 Weld County Road 1. I think I missed that last week. Say my name and address. So I'm here to talk about fracking. And one of the things I wanted to talk and bring to your attention is I've been trying to work with the city staff about finding out with regard to Terracon and the study that was done a year ago and how this was reported to the COGCC and what is actually taking place down there at Union Reservoir. We have a leak that was reported on January 11th, January 2011. I've been trying to find out from the city whether they reported it to COGCC at that point or what the reporting was done, because we're not finding anything on COGCC. COGCC has not responded to us, so I'd like to get an answer to how this has been communicated with regard to being remediated down at Union Reservoir, because we do have a leak down there, and I don't know how long it's been leaking or if it's still leaking. Which leads me along the lines of I've been talking about moving and the reasons why people are like, well, why would you move? I mean, didn't you know that this was going to be here? And the thing is, this was on the table back when I moved here, and that's development around Union Reservoir that Dale Bruns was promoting at that time. He was peddling this, now he's peddling the gas, but this was his development. And you know what, I could have lived with this, because this is people, community, family, and instead I think what we're bringing in here is gas and oil along our Union Reservoir. This is a great place, a great recreation place, and I thought it was a great place to raise my son and my family. I'm not real confident in what I see happening with regard to getting stuff cleaned up. I don't have confidence in my city council that this is going to be taken care of, that I have the safeguards in place. I feel like there's more of a push to get this than to not get this with regard to the time frame and just the answers that I'm hearing from with regard to oil and gas, and it's coming, and there's not much we can do about it. And I don't think that's the case, and so I really would like you guys to keep stepping up and do what you can, because there is no hurry on this. There really isn't. It's cheap right now, and that's the only reason they want in. And they're cutting regulations because it's so cheap. So do what you can. I don't really want to move, but I'm feeling compelled because I don't feel like I've got the support. And there's proof that there's contamination going on, and there's not much getting done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Gene Ditzler, followed by Joe Bassman.
Hi, Gene Ditzler, 1541 Checker Drive. Thank you, City Council, for the opportunity to speak. I just came tonight to bring to your attention a city ordinance, 09547. It was adopted June 13th, 1995, and it's in regards to the acquisition of oil and gas wells on land on which the city wished to build a public golf course, which is now Ute Creek Golf Course, with the surrounding Spring Valley development. I'm going to read a few highlights from the document. Sorry, catch my breath upstairs. Whereas the City of Longmont is a home rule municipal corporation existing and operating pursuant to Article 20 of the Constitution of the State of Colorado and the City of Longmont Home Rule Charter, And whereas the city has determined that it is necessary and in the public interest to purchase land for a public golf course, whereas Article 20 of the Colorado Constitution, Section 13.5 of the city's Home Rule Charter, and Article 1 of Title 38 CRS is as amended, provide the constitutional and statutory powers and procedures for the use of the power of eminent domain by a home rule city to acquire property or interest therein. And whereas certain property described in the attachment A, hereby incorporated by reference, is needed for a public golf course. So then there's a little bit more, but I don't want to read it all, but it says, it is in the public interest to acquire an outstanding oil and gas lease and well and associated real and personal property on the land planned for the public golf course because the outstanding oil and gas lease may prevent SVP from conveying the public golf course free of encumbrances, and the current gas well on the land is inconsistent with the aesthetic qualities of the championship golf course and adjacent pleasant residential community the city seeks to develop on the land, and the potential fire hazard of wells on and next to a residential community and the danger to residents and golfers from additional truck and service vehicle traffic and other perils associated with oil and gas development are contrary to the health, safety, and welfare of present and future citizens, residents, and golfers. So I'd ask the City Council to please review a copy of this ordinance and how it reflects on its current efforts at strengthening regulations, especially in regards to what the city declared as contrary to the health, safety, and welfare of present and future citizens. It seems that in 1995 that the city was willing to use its home rule charter as a means to take steps to ensure that oil and gas wells were not located near homes and golf courses. I urge you to extend the moratorium so that issues such as these can be properly discovered and the city can take appropriate steps, as it has in the past, to protect its citizens before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Joe Bassman, followed by Shelley Bassman.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Joe Bassman, 3414 Lakeview Circle in Longmont, where I own the surface rights. Please take a look at the photograph that I just passed out that highlights areas where the City of Longmont currently owns what's indicated as 3 historic gas wells and 3 abandoned oil pits, evaporation pits, that were developed into a high-density Longmont subdivision, Spring Valley Estates. Homes are currently situated on the surface estate above these mineral interests. The city acquired these mineral properties from Top Operating in the mid-1990s. As a stipulation of transfer of the fee ownership, Longmont, the city of Longmont, assumed all responsibility for the cleanup of the site and for the remediation of what was at the time an unsatisfactory inspection incident. I have various concerns regarding this situation. I'm not going to mention them here. They're available at longmontroar.org. I do believe that this situation is significant. I suggest to you tonight that the moratorium that we currently have in place, and thank you for that, should be extended indefinitely until the issues that are associated with this map and this photograph that I just handed you can be worked out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Shelley Bassman, followed by Rick King.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Somewhere I heard that it's a good idea to say something good when you begin talking, with something of gratitude. And I've been remiss in that. So this evening, coming over here, south on Hover and east on 9th, we had one stoplight. Everything seemed to be quite coordinated, and that's often the case, I find, in Longmont. So I want to say thank you. Transportation. And as one who enjoys carry-in boating at McIntosh Lake, it's really cool to see that the ice is all melted and that boating season can commence. In fact, Joe and I went kayaking a couple weeks ago, and our entry was over sheets of ice, but that's all gone now. You can carry in. So I'm happy to say that boating season has begun, and it's now 10 and a half months in Longmont. And I do still have the issue of gas wells in suburban areas and the lack of adequate regulation to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of the people who live in suburban and urban areas. And my studies, there's probably the single most important parameter ensuring the safety of residents is the setback of the well pad. I used to say just the well. And the most safe parameter or number that has been found is 1,000 feet. And that's even for one's property value safety. In Flower Mound, Texas, their research found that it diminishes sharply closely to the well head, and then at about 1,000 feet, there's no effect on property values. And I want that, I think it's important that that setback be to the perimeter of the pad, because there's the well, and then there's the tanks, there's the pumping station, there's all. When we have a setback to a home or a industrial something, it's to the building, not to the interior middle bathroom. It's to the building. And I urge the city, I urge you to adopt 1,000-foot setbacks. Thank you.
Shelley, can we get your name and address, please?
Same as his. I'm Shelley Bassman, 3414 Lakeview Circle. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Next is Rick King, followed by Jeff Thompson.
My name is Rick King, and I live at 1421 Northwestern Road in Longmont. I'm also a pastor, a husband, and a father who wants my children and those who go to my church to grow up in a world where everyone is treated equally. Mayor Pro Tem Santos and members of the City Council, I am speaking in support of Mayor Coombs' right to sign the list of mayors who support marriage equality. This is an issue of basic civil rights, not one of morality. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law for all of its citizens, regardless of who they are. It's because of this that I am for marriage equality and agree with Mayor Coombs' right to sign the list, in expression of his own personal, private opinion as a citizen of the state of Colorado. That said, marriage equality is not even an issue that would have come before the City Council. Its members have a right to their own opinions on this issue, just like all Longmont citizens, but marriage equality is not subject to a council decision at present. What Mayor Coombs' signing of the list has done is given us an occasion to respond. Will we resort to silence or violence, as much of our nation does these days, either refusing to talk about it for fear of getting into an argument that might lead to violence, or in arguing our own hardened positions louder and more forcefully, escalating possibly into physical violence, bullying, and hate crimes? Or will we risk the much more difficult but essential task of hanging in there with each other while having a truthful conversation? There are plenty of people who say, "Here I stand," and then walk away for fear of compromising their principles. And there are plenty of people who will compromise all their principles in an effort to preserve the relationship. But in the spirit of community, it depends on us being able to speak our truth to one another and not walk away, but seek understanding and a way forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Thompson, followed by Beth Vowell.
Jeff Thompson, 1616 Sumner Street. I gave all of you, hopefully you all got this summary sheet, and what it does is it contrasts our water planning with that of Boulder. On the agenda tonight, the water utility is presenting both supply and demand analysis. I hope the people in the city watching this and kind of spread the word that what the water utility is presenting is absolutely unbelievable. We're currently running about 180 gallons per capita per day. The study says 190, but it's dropping, and the studies are always a little bit behind. And what the water utility is proposing is the opposite of what all the other water utilities in the area are doing. They're proposing that we increase our gallon per capita per day all the way from about 180 to 267 gallons per capita per day. And you got 26 pages of information that's basically gibberish, and nowhere do they even note that. They don't even want accountability for that. They're saying that we should go from 180 gallons per capita per day to 267 gallons per capita per day, and they, like usually goes on with the city council, they try to just slip that by you. And the city council owes it to the people of Longmont for an explanation. In fact, they owe the people of Longmont an explanation of why in the world would we pay a consultant to figure out how to make our water use go up and not down. Boulder, in a 100-year drought scenario, has a water supply of 22,308 acre-feet, whereas they say Longmont, in that same scenario, needs a water supply of 32,616 acre-feet. And yet Boulder's water supply, which is 10,000 acre-feet less, supports over twice as many jobs. So you've got to equate water supply to jobs and to economic development. And doesn't our water utility report to a director of economic development, or do we even still have a director of economic development? This is an economic development disaster. It's not only just stupid, it's an economic development disaster because we don't realize the huge water resource that we have, and what this is all to do is to push Longmont into buying additional water resources so we can be the water supplier to Firestone. How does that help economic development?
Thank you, Jeff. Beth Val, followed by Strider Benston. Go ahead. If you need to move it down further, you can. There you go.
All right. Hi, my name's Beth Vowell. I live at 520 Elliott Street here in Longmont. And good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Gabe Santos and City Council. I grew up in Boulder County and lived in Longmont since 1994. And I know he's not here, but I publicly wanted to thank Dennis Coombs for supporting marriage equality. It's simply the right thing to do. If LGBT people want to get married, they should be able to. If LGBT people, they should be able to have the same rights that everyone else does. LGBT people getting married doesn't affect marriage. Divorce affects marriage. I understand that Dennis was speaking as a private citizen, not for the City Council and not for the City of Longmont. I believe he made that very clear. Dennis is a private citizen who happens to be mayor of Longmont, and just because you're mayor, you still have your First Amendment rights, which includes freedom of speech. All human beings deserve equal rights. All human beings deserve to be happy, safe, and free to be who they are. I fully support Dennis signing the petition for marriage equality. Thank you, Dennis, for all you and City Council do and continue to do to help make Longmont an even better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Strider Benston is our last speaker.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos and City Council. Just a couple of things sort of have come up. One, it's recently become public knowledge that Attorney General John Suthers has been threatening home rule cities such as Colorado Springs to say you really have no right to regulate the damage to the city and its lands or the poisoning of its waters, that really the COGCC has absolute authority. No, they are an advisory commission. And as advisory commission, they are mandated to promote the oil industry, but it certainly has no authority to violate home rule or the possibility of the citizens of this state or its cities to regulate and promote the safety of our water and our lands. I met last weekend with downstream neighbors in Colorado Springs and Maud Barlow, who wrote this wonderful book, Blue Gold, which you better read if you want to stay alive on this planet. 10 years ago, I met her in Canada at that time. And she points out, among many other things, that within 20 years, 41 states in this country are likely to be suffering severe water issues, severe. And of course, in many countries, it'll be much worse than that. Much of that is even before the fracking of 7 million gallons per well of our 40 to 80,000 wells in Colorado. And also, I would like to commend Mayor Dennis Coombs for his stand in signing the marriage equality in the National Cities meeting. And I'd like to point out there should not be any issue whatever, because it is a private decision of a citizen who happens to be a city official, but he was not actively representing the city. But as you may recall, our recent mayor twice violated a city council vote in going to Colorado Municipal League and voting against council member Sarah Levison for being on the executive board of the council of the Colorado Municipal League. That was a discussed issue, and it was a city vote, and he went against what the city council had voted. This has nothing to do with any discussion or any mandate by the city. It was a personal decision by the mayor, and I commend it highly because the basic concept of our country is inclusiveness and democracy. Thank you much.
Thank you, Strider. We have no other persons signed up for public invited to be heard, so unless someone raises their hand, I will close public invited to be heard. Okay, Gordon, let's go.
Mayor and Council, the first item under special reports is going to be made by Morgan Rogers, and she'll present the Boulder County Trends Report.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Morgan Rogers, and I'm with the Community Foundation, and I did bring extra copies. I don't know if Councilmember Levinson had gotten copies. Yes, to everyone. Great. Thank you for doing so. Several of you I've known actually for many years now, and some of you are new to me, so I thought I'd take a minute just to introduce actually what the Community Foundation does and our role in Boulder County. Let's see if I can get this to work. Hold on just a second. Well, if you can. This should be off the net. It should just be off. I wonder if you can go back and re-pop it. And then that's maybe a minute. Yeah. Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. So, the Community Foundation actually serves all of Boulder County, inclusive of Longmont, and wanted to share with you a little bit about what we're doing in Boulder County. Let's see if I can hit that and just move it. Great. Yes. So the mission of the Community Foundation, we exist to improve the quality of life in Boulder County now and forever, and to build a culture of giving. And so we are an endowed foundation, and we have been around for 20 years. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. And how we fulfill that mission, 3 ways: through grant making, community leadership, and research and advocacy. I wonder if I can just hit that. Yes. No. So in 2010, we gave out just under $6 million in grants. Most of that stayed in Boulder County. You can see how that was distributed. I haven't had a chance to get our updated 2011 numbers, but I know it was very similar to that. We do a number of community leadership programs, including our Leadership Fellows program, which Councilmember Semery has been a guest at, and we really appreciate your participation in that. And finally, research and advocacy. And this is what I wanted to share with you some highlights from this evening. We put out the Boulder County Trends Report every other year, doing comprehensive research on Boulder County in terms of what we do well as a community, what do we not do so well, and use that data to drive our grant making and our programs and our partnership with local governments and nonprofits to try to address some of those emerging needs. So with that, I thought I'd dive into some of the highlights. But first, I just want to say, because I'm going to talk in the next 15 minutes a lot of numbers and data, but I did want to say the three takeaways, the three highlights really from the latest trends report that I think are important to take away from the evening. One is that Boulder County has the same poverty rate as the nation. So whereas the nation had numerous headlines around now that we have more people living in poverty than ever before in our nation's history, at a poverty rate of 15%, Boulder County actually has the same poverty rate. So that's true of our local community as well. We have 15% of folks locally living below that federal poverty level. Of course, in Longmont, it's actually higher. 16% of all people living in Longmont are living below that federal poverty level, and 21% of children. So 1 out of every 5 kids in this city within Boulder County is living below that federal poverty level. And of course, federal poverty for a family of 4 is about $23,000 a year. So, you know, where we've seen the biggest increases locally, it's definitely been with families with children. The second takeaway is that we have done a lot of work at the Community Foundation trying to do outreach and education around our achievement gap in both of our school districts. Both in Boulder Valley and St. Vrain Valley school districts, we have 2 of the widest achievement gaps in the state between kids who are doing well and kids who aren't doing well. Mostly that can be tracked along economic lines. And what we know is that we've seen a big difference in CSAP scores over the years between kids on free and reduced lunch and those kids who aren't on free and reduced lunch. And then what we found out recently when the Colorado Department of Education started tracking the median growth percentile was that our low-income kids were actually making less progress annually than their low-income peers around the state. And again, that was true in both local school districts. So while we started with a significant gap in 3rd grade when we're able to measure that achievement gap in CSAP scores, that gap was increasing annually for every year those kids were in school because of the difference in that median growth percentile. And so that's an area that we've been working actually quite a bit with St. Vrain Valley School District and Boulder Valley and trying to address that achievement gap. And finally, the third takeaway I'd say from the evening and from the Trends Report is that Boulder County participated in a national poll that the Gallup folks put on comparing our community to 26 others around the country and looking at community attachment. And what they found was that community attachment is directly correlated with your local GDP. And if you can increase your community sense of attachment, you can actually increase positively your local GDP. And so while Boulder County came out favorably compared to other peer communities around the U.S. in terms of aesthetics and social offerings, which were 2 of the key factors in building community attachment, we actually scored lower in openness. And how open are we to new folks? How open are we to our neighbors? And so we scored lower as a community in terms of our openness, and in particular we scored low in terms of openness to immigrants and minorities. And this was perceived openness, not just among immigrants and minorities, but among all folks responding to the Gallup poll. So this was an area that was concerning to us and why the Community Foundation has taken on leadership as one of our key areas of trying to move the needle. So with that, those are our 3 takeaways. I'm going to dive into just sharing some highlights from the data in the report. And this is all in the report, so if we don't get through it all, it's all there. Just a word about Boulder County's growth. Of course, as a county, we grew about 8% over the last 10 years. And as a point of comparison, Adams County, Larimer County grew about 21% over that same time period. Weld County grew 41% over that same time period. So if we just look at Boulder County, we grew at about 8%, and most of that growth was concentrated in the eastern part of the county. So as you all know, City of Longmont grew more than 20% over that time period of 10 years, whereas the City of Boulder grew just 3%. Erie, neighbors just down the road there, almost 200%. So where are we seeing most of the growth in Boulder County? It's definitely in the eastern part, with the City of Longmont showing, certainly in terms of numbers, we're thinking that growing much faster than the City of Boulder. Where else are we seeing demographic changes? If you look at this chart, it demonstrates age groups and projecting out through 2020. And really the most important line to pay attention to is that yellow glaring light that cuts across all of the others, and that's our 60-plus population. So right now, older adults represent about 11% of Boulder County residents. By 2020, it's expected that 1 out of every 5 of us will be over the age of 60. So again, huge implications for transportation, for housing, for healthcare. And at the Community Foundation, we also pay a lot of attention to the collective assets of our older adults. So how can we engage these older adults, many of whom are not actually aging in Boulder County, but are coming here from other places. We're a very attractive place for older adults to be moving to for retirement, maybe because they have kids or grandkids here. So how do we engage those folks in our community, and in particular our schools, in trying to move the needle on that achievement gap? Something else that's been changing certainly in the last 20 years as a community, we are becoming more diverse. And so in recognizing 1 out of every 4 of us countywide identifies as a person of color now. That's even higher in the City of Longmont. And whereas 14% of us countywide identify as Latino, and again, it's about a quarter of Longmont residents, 23% of kids countywide are Latino now. And again, it's actually about 37% in the City of Longmont. So in terms of what are we projecting going forward, not only are we becoming a more diverse community today than we were 10 years ago, but that is going to continue. Certainly if you look at our demographic trends among children. And the City of Longmont actually very much reflects the state trends. So about 1/3 of kids in Colorado are Latino now. And this is just a chart that shows some of the differences depending on where you are in Boulder County, population, median age, median home price. And I think when you look at median home price, this is what's driving, of course, the growth in the eastern part of the county, and why especially young families are moving to Longmont and other surrounding communities. I'd also say that we're a highly educated community compared to most others around the country. So if you scroll down to those. These are just adults over the age of 25 who have a bachelor's degree or more. The national rate is just 28%. So again, countywide, we continue to be one of the most highly educated communities in the country. And yet, at the same time, where have we seen the hardest hits in terms of poverty? It's definitely been among folks without a high school education. And so we lay out some of the poverty numbers in this chart here, and again, as I referenced, individuals and children within the City of Longmont living below that federal poverty level. If we just look at poverty level for those without a high school degree, 33%. So it's 1/3 of all folks without a high school degree in the City of Longmont are living below federal poverty. Much, much higher than just 5% of those adults with a bachelor's. Okay, so that's who's been hit hardest by this economic recession. When we look at our education, I spoke to the issue of the achievement gap. The area that the Community Foundation has chosen to zero in on in a partnership, again, with both local school districts, is looking at early care and education to try to prevent that gap before it starts. And what we know is that we have a capacity challenge in Colorado and in Boulder County in terms of meeting all the needs for full-day kindergarten. So again, and preschool programs, working with St. Vrain, who is actually far and above ahead of Boulder Valley School District in terms of the number of full-day kindergarten and preschool programs already in place. Just a word about that demographic changes that we talked about and that growth in the eastern part of Boulder County. The school district, St. Vrain, has seen a 40% growth in the last 10 years. That's a huge increase in demand for services. And if you scroll then across, you can look at, 1/3 of kids are now on free and reduced lunch, 15% are English language learners, and 1/3 identify, again, as kids of color. So these are big changes over a short period of time for our local schools. This is just a graphic that demonstrates the achievement gap, and there's a lot going on here, but again, it's in the trends report, and for those folks who are here in attendance this evening, I brought extra copies if you'd like to take one. You can see the trains show CSAP scores for our green trains. Those are our middle and upper income kids, and you can compare that to the blue trains, which are our low income kids, and you can see significant gaps in both school districts compared to the statewide gap. And again, some of that is because our high-achieving kids are out in front and doing so much better than their middle and upper-income peers across the state. But our blue trains, those low-income kids, are actually behind their peers across the state. And then that speedometer represents that median growth percentile. And you can see St. Vrain actually made significant growth in that growth percentile from 2010 to 2011, but still there's work to be done in trying to close that gap. And of course, we look at dropout rates in Boulder County, and this is something that we're very concerned about. And, you know, why are we concerned? This came out of a statewide study looking at Colorado education. For every 100 Latino ninth graders in a Colorado public school today, only 9 are expected to graduate from college. So again, thinking not just in terms of social justice, this is a huge social justice issue, but it's also really a big economic issue. You know, I mentioned a third of Colorado kids are Latino, a third of Longmont kids are Latino. So this is really an issue that we need to address now in looking at our future.
Morgan, can you go back to the last slide before you went to the student?
Sure, the dropout rates.
Yeah, I want to see where.
So this is a cumulative dropout rate between 7th and 12th grade, and of course it concentrates the closer kids get to graduation.
Okay, I was looking. I wanted to see where St. Vrain Valley School District was at.
Yeah, and I mentioned that we mostly look at our achievement gap as an economic issue because it is, but I think there's also a cultural issue on top of that. When you look at it, the dropout rate of our Latino students is higher than our economically disadvantaged students, and so again, I think this speaks to our delayed response in shifting the way that we do business and education to respond to our changing demographics, and something that we're trying to address also.
Well, it shows that the St. Vrain Valley School District at least is doing reasonably well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I don't mean to focus more attention on the negative than on the positive. There are a lot of really good things going on locally, and as I pointed to in the change in that median growth percentile in the last year, St. Vrain has been very intentional in addressing that achievement gap through some federally sponsored programs, and we're extremely supportive of the progress they've made.
Thanks.
You know, just looking at leadership, and again, this is across all areas and why we've developed our Leadership Fellows program, but, you know, I mentioned a third of kids in both school districts are kids of color. You know, just 10% of teachers in both school districts are people of color, and we currently have no school board members in either school board who are people of color. And so just thinking about who are the policymakers and are we making the most effective policies in our schools for the kids who are there. You know, I'm going to speed along because we've got a lot to cover, but I think everyone's familiar with the strains on our local budgets for schools. And why does this matter? You know, why are we addressing the achievement gap? I talked about the Colorado statewide public education graduation rate for Latino students, and I mentioned, you know, those without a high school degree were most hard hit in this economic recession, and you can see just how this plays out in terms of average salary in Boulder County. So in the last 5 years, average salary, if you didn't have a high school degree, you saw that drop by almost 20%. And you can compare that to almost a 20% increase for those folks who did have a bachelor's degree. I'm going to skip over health just in terms of time and focus a little bit on some of our local economic indicators. You know, this was a headline on this trends report also. We're losing our middle class. You know, not just nationally, but here in Boulder County. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is an increase in those low-income households and an increase in those high-income households and a decrease in that mid-range. And so just thinking about what sort of economic development, what kind of job training are we doing locally to try to build up that middle class, again, in Boulder County. And you can see, you know, along the theme of disparity, the difference in our median income for households between Latino and non-Hispanic white families. And these are just some poverty numbers countywide. And again, that disparity that I spoke to, a third of our Latino kids are living in poverty locally, compared to just 6% actually of non-Hispanic white children. And that's a poverty indicator comparison between cities. This I actually found particularly interesting when we think about housing, and I know there's been a lot of attention on foreclosures, certainly in the last couple of years, and that's been an issue that our community has been facing. This looks at, the first line is just houses that don't have any mortgage at all. All right, so the house is paid off in full. The second line is owners who spend over 30%, which is the recommended amount of your monthly income on a mortgage, and then compare that to renters who are spending a significant portion of their monthly income. And again, just thinking about affordable housing, what's in place, what are we doing to support folks in terms of housing stability. We've seen tremendous increases on requests for food stamps, for temporary assistance for needy families, and for Medicaid in Boulder County. This has been a huge strain on our local resources and, of course, on the state's, which this is a picture that speaks to, I think, not only the trend we've been seeing in the last 10 years in Colorado, but what is more to come for Colorado's state budget. The general fund, which is the fund that pays for most of the things we think of in terms of state services, K-12 education, higher ed, roads and bridges, prisons. You can see that general fund increased just 7% over the last 10 years. Compare that to a Colorado population increase of almost 20% over that same time period. So just the demand on those services has been increasing far faster than the general fund, which pays for those services. So I think as Coloradans, what this graphic is meant to do is stimulate some sort of conversation on, this is unsustainable. We cannot continue to offer the same level of services as a state or have the same demand on services as a state as we have had based on our current structure. So this is a conversation I know the governor has mentioned in his State of the State, about to launch this TBD conversation around the state of Colorado on, what do we want as Coloradans? Do we want to decrease our services, or do we want to increase our taxes? And this is just a graphic that demonstrates why that conversation is happening. And in terms of tracking assets, and I know this looks very outdated, it's because the economic census is so outdated, but as we get numbers, we're looking at trends, and we have seen a tremendous increase in the businesses owned by Latinos locally across Boulder County. And I'm going to skip arts and culture and environment, although we do have a lot of indicators in here to speak to those areas. And I'm going to close just with a few indicators around civic participation and giving, and then ask if anyone has any questions. This is an area near and dear to the foundation's heart. There are 820 registered nonprofits in Boulder County, and this is how they break down. You can see most of them are very small. And so Boulder County nonprofits reflect very much our entrepreneurial community that we see in the for-profit side. Lots of ideas, lots of creative folks who see a problem and they want to try to solve it, and they start maybe a nonprofit, and sometimes that takes off and grows, and sometimes it doesn't. And we feel like that's a healthy thing to be going on, a healthy culture of creativity among our nonprofits in Boulder County. We ask folks about giving. This is the only primary research that we do for the Trends Report. We ask about volunteerism and giving, and what we know is that most folks that we talk to are giving more of their money to local organizations than outside of Boulder County. And of course, we have a very engaged community. Again, this is off of primary research that we did through a survey, but these numbers are pretty amazing in terms of formal volunteerism, informal volunteerism, and the importance of neighboring. And then the number of folks who reported attending a public meeting in the last year is really high compared to most other communities across the country. And when we look at leadership, I mentioned leadership among our education, not really reflecting our changing demographics. This is another area in terms of public government that we track at the Community Foundation. These are appointed boards and commissions positions. And again, just looking at these numbers, we feel it's important to bring to attention that, as I mentioned, 1 out of every 4 of us now identifies as a person of color countywide. And we've seen across all sectors, the nonprofit sector, the public sector, education, and business, that leadership is not yet reflecting those changing demographics. And this is my final chart to share with you. This is what I spoke to in the beginning as one of our takeaways in terms of community attachment. And again, those 3 areas that the Gallup folks identified as key to driving community attachment. That was aesthetics, social offerings, and openness. And as I mentioned, Boulder County did very well in terms of our aesthetics. So how do folks feel about the way that our parks and open space and downtown areas feel very positively about that and about our social offerings. And you can see how folks ranked openness, and you can see that openness to immigrants and minorities across all respondents was perceived to be lower than families with children, our GLBT community, older adults, and so forth. And before I open it up for questions, I just want to also say that the Community Foundation launched a new website to go along with our indicators report this year. This breaks down community indicators neighborhood by neighborhood. So it's meant to be more interactive and something that we can update more often than the every 2 years printed report. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look. You can zero in on your neighborhood and compare that to other neighborhoods around Boulder County for most of the indicators that we have available. So thank you very much, and I welcome any questions.
Any members of council have questions for Morgan?
Great. Thank you.
Councilmember Witt.
Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this and bring it to us. As community leaders, we so appreciate the work that you do so that we can have a better feel of the data. And so thank you so much for all this. I'm sure that we're going to take some time to digest it all.
It's a lot to throw out at you on one setting. Yes, thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Finley. Actually, it says Councilmember Finley. So, Councilmember Levison. Sorry, I'm going to have to look at the lights because it actually shows on here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
Councilmember Levison.
Unless we're changing, like, positions, shape-shifting or something, I don't know.
I looked at what it said. So.
Okay.
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you. Morgan, thanks again for coming, and thank you for all the work you're doing with outreach in the community to get this information out on the report. I'm just always disappointed at how our numbers around the issues of achievement and the poverty have really affected our community, and especially the educational component. We really need to figure out a way that we're going to be changing those numbers, and we'll hear, I don't know if you have an opportunity to stick around for the Housing Authority Board, but they'll be talking about this pilot anti-poverty program we have, which I think that part of what was the force behind that initiative is some of these numbers you presented 2 years ago, and how we do have some long-term issues here of people not being able to achieve economic success for themselves and for also their children and their families. So thank you for bringing this to light, and I hope maybe a couple years from now the numbers for Longmont will look better. So thank you for all your work you do, and I know it's a lot to come out to all these boards and commissions and city councils to present the information, but we do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and we always appreciate the invitation and the good work that I know City Council and your community partners are doing to address these areas. So the more that we can all work in partnership together, I think the more impact we can have.
Make sure I got this right. Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I get the chance to see a lot of presentations. You did awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Very impressive. Want a job? Just kidding, Gordon. Just kidding. Just phenomenal. I love data, and you present a lot of data. My question is, I'd be kind of curious to know, I'm just making a leap here, an assumption that I'm looking at the quality of your presentation. I'd be curious to see your recommendations to how to solve a lot of these problems. And I know that you mentioned that you do focus on that. So I'm just curious, what activities and actions do you take personally to then take the data and come up with a solution?
Great question. And and I wish that we had more space, I guess, to discuss that, not only in the printed report, but just in our community, right, to talk about what actions folks can take. And we try to put that in each chapter of the Trends Report. Here are some tangible things that individuals and families and businesses can do to address these areas, because in recognizing that there's something that we can all contribute in moving these. In terms of what is the Community Foundation doing to address these areas, I'm happy to speak to those either now or you want to hear a couple highlights?
Yeah.
Sure, I'll give you a couple highlights. So in terms of looking at the achievement gap, that's what our Board of Trustees identified as the top priority for them for a 4-year period at least. So we're about 3 years into a 4-year campaign to try to raise awareness around the achievement gap in Boulder County and the effect of investing in early care and education. So we were on a mission to raise $1 million to put into sustainable, long-term changes to prevent that achievement gap. And we're about 3/4 of the way through, so we're on target right now. We worked with Boulder Valley School District a couple of years ago to increase a mill levy to put $5 million permanently into expanding preschool and kindergarten in BVSD, and we're now in similar conversations with St. Vrain to see if we can align in supporting what they're doing to try to prevent that achievement gap. So I suspect we'll all be hearing a little bit more about that in the near future. And then in terms of our gap in leadership, the Community Foundation has been running a program for 3 years now, which, again, we've been happy to have the support of this council on looking at leadership and the pipeline of emerging transformational and multicultural leaders across Boulder County, and trying to build that network, again, across sectors. So taking emerging leaders from the public sector and education and nonprofits and business, and trying to build a more diverse network with our current leaders. So we bring in current leaders once a month to visit with our emerging leaders to try to build those relationships and change the pipeline of recruitment into leadership positions. There's a few sort of highlights that speak to that. I think the other thing we try to do is to hear about and have our finger on the pulse of what programs our community partners are investing in. For instance, the City of Longmont and what you're doing around anti-poverty measures, and what the county's doing to try to address poverty locally, and to try to support that and get the word out into the broader community about here are some investments that are being made and here's how to get involved. So that's how we try to leverage those investments from our partners as well.
I just speaking as one of 7, is Brian Bagley.
Yes.
Rather than a council member. I'd love just a short email with some ideas that you might have about what I and other members of council might do to be able to affect the numbers.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'd appreciate that.
Sure. I will be happy to follow up with you with an email.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you. And one of the programs, didn't the Community Foundation help with the, I don't know if I'm going to get the abbreviations, PASEO? It's
PASO.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's educating Latino caregivers to do more reading and educational activities. And then Pearl, is Pearl still supporting?
Yes, absolutely. Great. 2 programs I'll just mention. PASO, which is Providers Advancing School Outcomes, works with family, friend, and neighbor care providers across Boulder County and actually beyond Boulder County to try to help brain development for kids 0 to 5 who are outside of formal care, recognizing that a lot of families actually opt to use informal care providers, either because of the time issue or because of financial reasons or relationship, cultural. And so they work with those informal care providers to provide good brain development activities in an inexpensive way to try to get those kids to arrive at school ready to learn and able to compete in the same classroom as kids who have been in a formal setting for most of their early lives. So thank you. We have been supporting that program as well. And then Pearl, which is People Engaged in Raising Leaders. It's a program through Boulder County that specifically looks at training people of color for boards and commissions positions. So encourage council to look to Pearl as a resource in recruiting boards and commissions applicants as well. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you, council members, more for what you do.
Yes.
And Morgan, would you like to give out the website for the Trends Report magazine?
Yes, thank you. It's www.comfound.org. That's COMMFOUND. .org. And again, you can access the online magazine of trends, and then you can also access our indicator map, the interactive indicator map. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Mayor and Council, the next item will be introduced by Kathy Fedler.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council. Kathy Fedler, CDBG Coordinator. And tonight is the joint meeting with the Longmont Housing Authority Board. So I'm going to ask those folks to come on down while I make my brief introduction. So as you know, the Longmont Housing Authority and the Longmont Housing Development Corporation, which is the nonprofit sister organization of the Housing Authority, are two of the primary agencies that assist the city in meeting the community's housing needs. The LHA Housing Authority primarily administers the city's Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as the Section 8 program, which provides rent assistance to households with very low incomes, below 50% of the area median income or less. It also owns and manages properties, rental properties, and is our partner agency in our anti-poverty pilot program, the RISE program. And Michael and I will be talking about that. So I think Michael has about a 10 or 15 minute presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Hi, Michael.
Mayor Pro Tem Gabe Santos. Hello, how are you this evening? Hi, members of council. My name is Michael Reese, the Executive Director of the Longmont Housing Authority and the Longmont Housing Development Corporation. Why don't I go ahead and just get started with some introductions and make sure that we all know one another. Each year we do come before council. It's one of the requirements of the state statute, and for new members of council, we'll just touch on some of the regular rules about our presentation. And we come each year to tell the council what we've done, have a dialogue about what we'll be doing, and move forward, and then we usually break, and then we invite you back for the fun stuff like groundbreakings and openings and Christmas parties, holiday parties. Joining me tonight is a couple members of the Longmont Housing Authority, Ann Keir, Darren Anson, and our newest member, Chris Curtis. Chris just went through the intake of the council. I don't know who was involved in her interviews, but we appreciate her joining our board. And in addition to the members that are here from the Housing Authority, we have a 5-member board appointed by council. 2 members that cannot attend tonight is Greg Iwang and James Johnson, who's actually been ill. As Kathy mentioned, we do operate a nonprofit. We set up a nonprofit to take advantage of some federal funding about 20 years ago called the Longmont Housing Development Corporation, and that is a 6-member board right now, and we have the president of the board joining us. Eric Hozempa is back in the audience of the Longmont Housing Development Corporation. Some of the names on the board you'll know. They've been participating in Longmont activities for many years. Debbie Parris, Daryl Beck, Dan Benavides, Cyril Vidigar, and Tom Cobb. So we're thrilled to be able to come here tonight. We provided you a packet of information, a lot of data to absorb. I'd like to touch on a few key elements of the packet. I promise that I won't read it to you, but I will probably follow it mostly in outline form. Let's see. Why don't we just start? We do have a mission that we try to provide housing and related service to low and moderate income households, families, elderly and disabled households, and to relieve the community of substandard housing. So this is probably timely that we would follow the broader trends report that reflects on national, statewide, Boulder County trends. We participate in trying to find solutions and addressing specific narrow areas of the trends report. We wish we could address all the areas, but we have our niche. We try to pursue our mission by creating affordable housing, protecting and enhancing the property and programs that we already have, sort of taking care of what we already have built over time, to develop our organizational infrastructure to meet the demands of the future and our current goals. And that's a challenging thing to do in this environment, as any small businessman will tell you. It's very difficult to keep things going on sometimes very tight budgets. And we try to develop and enhance and strengthen our external relationships with key partners other agencies in the larger community. And our key partner in this community is by far the Longmont City Council and the city staff and city government in terms of helping us achieve our agency goals. And as I mentioned, we're governed by a 5-member board appointed by council. The Housing Corporation is a private nonprofit, and they are self-appointing. It was created, however, by council and Longmont Housing Authority in 1993. In 2011, we assisted over 1,400 individuals in approximately 700 households through a variety of programs in our apartment buildings that Kathy noted in her opening remarks. We run 11 combined programs, including the individual properties and individual programs. Our largest program by far, and historically it has been a significant part of the Housing Authority's operation, is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, more commonly known as the Section 8 Housing Program. We operate that on a budget authority from HUD. And I think if you have any takeaways from that program for this community, let me just kind of touch on them now. It's a federal program. It's certainly subject to the whims of Congress, and we all know, that lots of discussion goes on around federal programs. We've seen a constant decline in the support for that program, and how it manifests itself in this town is we used to have budget authority to serve about 509 households. The budget authority has been diminishing, and some of the program costs have been rising. We're down to 475 households that can really be served by that program. We're projecting even further cuts in terms of the number of households served over the next year. So this time next year, we may be down as low as 425 households served with that federal program. That's just sort of the reality of the federal pressures, but also the program itself. We're provided by contract a certain amount of money to administer and offset the rents of the folks that utilize the voucher program. And external pressures like rent increases, utility increases, and the clients losing jobs or having jobs and wages interrupted cost the program more because the program agreement backfills the loss of income. So those factors are starting to contribute to a sort of a downward spiral of the program itself. It is over 50% of our households served, and it's certainly over 50% of our operating costs. So it's a very important program to watch, and we'd like to make sure that we don't see too steep a decline in the program going forward. Provided in your packet is some information about how much money we provided, that flows through the program, as well as how it's distributed across households. It's fairly evenly distributed across household types. It does assist directly about 628 children in those households. Another alarming takeaway, and I think it was referred to in the trend report, but in our program, the average annual household wages for the Housing Choice Voucher housing participants was $15,000 in 2010 per household. It's dropped to $12,428. I mean, people in our programs are just generally earning less money, and so our dollars have to cover more. In addition to the voucher program, we've moved into a housing first model, supportive housing model for several of our properties and some of our programs. And you've helped us in the area around assisting us purchase Briarwood Hotel, where we have our administrative offices, assisting us with purchasing the suites, the former Hawthorne Suites last year, which was a big effort in the supportive housing arena for our agency, as well as supporting tenant-based rental assistance programs through the home program for several years running now. They're smaller, with the exception of the suites, in terms of the number of households, but a little bit more intensive assistance to the households that are in the programs. And we're finding that bringing that additional supportive housing, wraparound services, a lot of buzzwords around the service. It's not just purely housing. We're finding that the households are stabilizing more and maintaining their jobs, maintaining their other forms of assistance, and just stabilizing around and getting their feet back on the ground, if it were. For a long time, we've assisted in between with some of their single-room occupancies, and we've been taking a more active role in providing some wraparound services to the clients that are in the SROs over at the in-between one. I note there the Briarwood. It's an adaptive reuse of an old hotel on Main Street, 1228 Main Street. The front part of it is our offices. The back part are 10 studio apartments, which we master lease to other nonprofits in the community, such as our center and some of the other nonprofits that have housing components linked to their program services. Clients get mental health assistance, case management, and a stable, safe environment in which to live. The other item I want to make sure that the community knows about is the Critical Housing Opportunities Program, which we run on behalf of the Longmont Housing Opportunities team. It is funded by the City of Longmont, again, and we run that housing program similar to the TBRA, Tenant-Based Rental Assistance Program. It's a little shorter term, 6 months to a year, but the clients that are in that program are higher risk, and they get a little bit more attention to wraparound services to better stabilize them. Councilmember Levison noted the RISE program, and I think before we enter into some specifics around the RISE program, we should just talk about where it's placed. Aspen Meadows neighborhood was constructed and completed in May of 2011. It's 28 family units, 2 and 3 bedroom units, a couple 4-bedroom units, on land that we purchased in 1999. So it gives you some context of when we buy a piece of land, it might be years before we identify what best will be the product to put on that land and how to finance it. The lead time on these types of things is quite extensive. We built the program, and instead of just following the path of just building an affordable housing campus, we opted into trying to bring additional supportive services right from the get-go. That was even further expanded with the decision of the council to provide the RISE dollars directly to program the RISE at Aspen Meadows neighborhood. Occupancy began in January of last year, was fully occupied by April, May, and early results. So they took the summer to sort of get to know one another and begin the Circles program and enter into the RISE program. And our staff person, Agatha, Agatha, I knew that. Agatha Moya, she's watching. Sorry, Agatha. She has done a tremendous job with the families there, and they are, all intents and purposes on a good path, good trajectory. Early sort of factors that we look at are indicating that they're on a very good trajectory against some of the folks that live in the property that are not participating. They're on a not as wonderful of a trajectory. So we're really pleased, and we're waiting to how this works out after a year or so. And I want to come back and tell a story about the RISE participants once I get through the rest of the summary report. For us, last year, one of the largest things we did, in addition to finishing Aspen Meadows neighborhood, was acquire the Hawthorne Suites and utilizing the supportive housing model. As many of you know, the council was instrumental in making available housing funds to purchase that building. We utilized some First Bank funding as well. A 70-unit apartment building. It sits on 6 acres of land. It's in your redevelopment area around the mall. It's nearly fully occupied. I think we have about 10 vacancies. We've been working on partnering with other agencies to get some of their clients in there. We've staffed that up with Annie Alexander, and our property manager is Josetta. And Annie is in charge of the case management and services providers at the site for the residents that live there. Really has been quite a model of success for supportive housing. And it's really where the industry is moving over the next few years, and we were very fortunate to find this building. Just happened to be in the right spot, available for the right price, and in tremendous condition. So that was a very big move for us, and it moves us into supportive housing away from our traditional senior housing and even family housing. And I think, let's see. So I won't go through the detail of every property. Some of you have visited our sites over the last year or so, and we invite you to come back and tour the properties, or certainly call if we have questions. We've been doing a lot of housing for seniors over the last 10 or 15 years, and it's resulted in a nice portfolio of housing for our low-income housing for seniors in our community. Village Place on Main Street, Aspen Meadows Apartments, and I won't get into the nitty-gritty of how these are all owned. They're owned partly by the Housing Authority, partly by the nonprofit, and it all really depends on how the funding came down, but we're basically responsible for those buildings regardless of which entity is the ultimate owner. Aspen Meadows Apartments, which is actually next to the Aspen Meadows neighborhood. Terry Street, which is downtown, and the Lodge at Hover Crossing, our most recent new construction building, is over on Hover and 18th. It's a senior site built with some funding from HUD, and we are pleased to announce that we're well under construction on the sister building right next to it, the Hearthstone at Hover Crossing, which is another 50-unit, deeply subsidized low-income housing facility for our seniors. That should be completed by October. And I did touch base on Aspen Meadows neighborhood. Let me speak for a little bit about our community and collaboration. We definitely try to get out into the community and participate and use our tools to benefit. One of the things we did last year that was new to us is we provided some on behalf of financing to the Hover community so that they could refinance their debt at more favorable interest rates. It really helped stabilize their nonprofit and their building to continue to provide low-income housing to a group of seniors that are in that community as well. So it's one of the financing mechanisms that housing authorities can avail itself to, and it usually results in a point or two better financing than a typical nonprofit could do on its own. We've done it in some smaller capacity with Habitat or with St. Vrain Manor, but Hover was a much larger transaction, several millions of dollars to refinance that entire property. Let me pause there, and well, I won't pause there. I'll just keep moving. Each year we come together and as a team and a group, staff, board members, sort of identify where we want to move in the future. I know Alex has been part of those meetings in the past. Gabe will be part of them hopefully next year, later this year. We've laid out a few things that we want to make sure we do this year successfully and move the ball forward, if you will. One thing, as I mentioned, we want to make sure we take care of what we already have, keep our programs stabilized, our units full and in good shape. We want to complete the Hearthstone at Hover Crossing. It's a several million-dollar transaction. We'd like to do that on time and on budget. We want to make sure that our supportive housing endeavors at the Briarwood and the Suites and Aspen Meadows neighborhood continue in the proper trajectory that they're on now and a positive trajectory. We will begin looking at emergency preparedness, working with the city, making sure our seniors and our residents know what to do in the case of an emergency to their building or the surrounding area. The Aspen Meadows neighborhood, we're going to work with I Have a Dream Foundation, and we are trying to fund and locate an I Have a Dream class for the students and children at Aspen Meadows neighborhood. It's one of our goals. It might take a little bit more than this year to get through, but that's one of our big emphases. And then we are always looking to try to acquire appropriate land, thinking forward, knowing that it may not be this board or this staff person, but some other board and staff person that will make decisions about that future land holding, about what the community might need at some future date. As I mentioned earlier, it could be 10-year hold for us, and so we're actively looking at what we can do in the area of land acquisition, especially now where land prices have certainly dropped significantly due to the recession. And I would like to just circle back on the RISE participants. And before we get into the specifics of how they're doing and what they're doing, I would like to share with something that emerged out of a conversation early on with the residents there. And this is from Agatha, a staff person. I'm going to read a paragraph and a little bit more. Agatha writes, from the very beginning of the program, I had in the back of my mind that when the holidays arrived, that there are many programs to help low-income housing families, that it would be a good idea for the families in the RISE program to give back to the community that has given them so much, and to recognize their strengths in themselves and how much they have to offer the community. So what they did was organize themselves, and last week provided a meal at the Boulder Shelter. They could have provided a meal at our center or several other nonprofits, but it takes a little bit more effort to organize themselves and go down to Boulder and do a lunch meal. So they all went down there on Sunday, January 22nd, and provided a meal. They did it in January because they knew that often during the holidays there's a lot of love for nonprofits from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and then in January there's sort of a lull, and they wanted to fill that gap. And we're very proud of them for looking, and not just looking at what they can take from the community, but what they can give back, and they found a niche, and we are very proud and thankful for their effort to do that. It was on their own. So I think I'll pause. That's my report. I have some board members here, and I bet you have some questions.
Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I have one question, and it's just probably because I'm new and
Sure.
I'm not familiar with the terms, but you used the term wraparound services. What does that include?
Well, it is mostly looking at a household of the family, and it might include mental health services. It might include access to additional counseling around school counseling for their children, job work counseling, connecting them to I call it connecting them to the matrix of services that are already in existence instead of trying to create our own. But it's to provide that little extra nudge and assistance to the residents in our buildings to better utilize what's available and to move forward. You'll hear wraparound services, supportive services, case management.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I like data, and a couple of these numbers I find troubling. Not to your fault. You've done a great job.
Were they inaccurate?
No. I'm assuming accuracy. One number, when I was going through the packet, was that you had, apparently there's a lottery.
Oh, yes, I could mention that, yeah.
And so, am I understanding correctly that there were 1,064 households that wanted assistance, but only 462 that got assistance?
Well, it's actually less optimistic than that. Every few years, we open our wait list. And we open our wait list for the Housing Choice Voucher Program utilizing a lottery system, which we instituted a couple of years ago, as opposed to a first-come, first-served system. The way the program works is we announce the lottery will be open. People come in and get a number. We close the lottery, and over 1,000 people came in and got a number. From that pool, had we funding available, we would then populate a wait list for the number of vouchers we would have available. However, due to the program strain and the dollars and the cost of operating the program, we were not able to issue any vouchers to anyone in that pool because the cost rapidly escalated as the year went on. So when we opened it in the spring and summer, we ended up with a lottery pool which we had no ability to service. And the one indicator is 2 years ago when we opened it, 886 people showed up for a lottery number. So this time around we're up 200. About 120 or so.
All right. So regardless of the number, it sounds like supply
is not
even near what the demand is.
And I think that was very apparent in the decline that you just saw in household incomes and the strain the households are under from the general trends report.
I don't know who is responsible for pairing you with Ms. Morgan, but I'm grateful for this. Because another number that I found somewhat troubling was that only 15 of the 28 families in the Aspen Meadows project are participating in the RISE program. And so if you've got a high demand and low supply, as I was listening to Ms. Morgan, I was worried about things like, direct correlations, and I've kind of got a stake in Latino prosperity. I've got a Latino wife, and I've got a biological Latino child, and I've got 3 adopted Latino children. And fortunately, they don't fall in the socioeconomic half that we're trying to help. But I'm sitting here looking at this data that she shared. You know, not having your GED, truancy, high school graduation, low CSAP scores. So I guess as I'm sitting here thinking, would it be a good idea if there are people willing to do things like the RISE program and engage in activities that will help them become more sufficient, would it be a good idea to link commitment to things like maybe if you're an adult, get your GED, or to become more committed to become proficient in the English language, for example. Keep in mind I'm fluent in Spanish. Keep in mind that my wife, when I married her, didn't speak English. So I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that it's a fact that when you can communicate in the community, you prosper. Things like maybe linking it to your children's truancy or high school graduation, or linking it directly to seeing CSAP scores improve. Now, granted, I've had all of 2 minutes to think of this, so it's not a suggestion, it's a question. Do we want to link the resources we provide families below the 30% income to their commitment to participate in programs that will help them to become more self-sufficient?
The best way to answer that is that the family at the RISE program is a self-opt-in choice. And the way the housing regulations operate is we cannot force them into a program such as that. These are opt-in self-sufficiency supportive housing programs.
So we cannot link help to a commitment to improve.
We cannot link housing.
We cannot link
housing. As the housing authority and the administrator of these housing programs, we cannot link housing to what you're
So
asking.
It's based solely on economic income or economics and then luck. You have to get in the lottery.
For housing assistance.
For the housing assistance piece, yes.
Interesting.
Now for RISE, we do have all kinds of measurements and outcome measures for those exact things that you're talking about. So in that pilot program, those are exactly what we're looking at. What is their education level? What is their income? What assets do they have? What benefits are they using? And what is the change over the time with the RISE program and the assistance that's given under that? So we will be, and we're already starting to seeing some pretty amazing trends.
Okay. And those trends are being tracked with the folks in the complex that do not participate. So we're actually seeing really dramatic differences. And this is only about, let's give it 3 or 4 months of sort of full participation, even with the folks that are participating, because there's been a lot of move-in and settlement issues.
I guess
so it's by this time next year, we'll have very good data on the outcome, maybe sooner. I know I saw some data today that was very promising, and it just depends on how much you want to look at it, and we have no issue with sharing that outside of an annual meeting, and Gabe Santos is our council liaison, and I can include the early data in our packet, and he can share it with the rest of council. But it's really, early data is really telling.
I voted for it because I wanted the data.
Okay.
But I guess I would just encourage you. I mean, you know more. You're experts in this area. Figure out a way to tie in, the things that are proven to help people succeed with the assistance. And I understand what you just said, but I don't know. Maybe there's a solution that would help us all. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Witt.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And Councilmember Bagley, just for some historical context, a few years ago, it was suggested that we put more money into the RISE program, and we decided not to do that because it would cut pretty deeply into some other funding to existing organizations. So we opted for a pilot program, which that is why there are only 15 families, because it's not, we didn't plow as much money into it as originally planned.
Councilmember Levis.
And I guess I'm very, very encouraged by the information you're bringing us this evening on the program. I had guessed it might work, but I'm hoping it exceeds even my greatest hopes for people helping themselves. And Councilmember Bagley, one of the goals of the RISE program is really that this group of families will be empowered enough and on their way such that they will make too much money to have assisted housing.
That'd be awesome.
So there will be 15 new spots for families that are desperate for housing. So the whole goal is to get people to the at-market housing market and to have them never be dependent again. And I guess when we were speaking about this early on, Edwina Salazar was in the audience, and my comment to her was, you know, we're hoping to put the OUR Center out of business. We're hoping that the people that are going to be needing services at the food bank are people that, you know, cannot, due to age or disability or some other catastrophic circumstance, cannot and do not have the tools to provide for themselves. So we're really trying to make some inroads here on the issue of poverty and housing and dependence on this cycle, because there are so many people in our community, as we've seen in that trends report. There are always going to be new families that need the housing assistance, and there's a very limited amount of money and resources to build that housing and keep it staffed and maintained. So, and Kathy, do you have anything else to add about, am I still right on the 5 years as the goal?
Well, and also, Councilmember Bagley, we realized that we're spreading money very thinly. This is a very concentrated effort for these 15, and not to take any away from the Housing Authority, but it's definitely a concentrated effort to get these folks in and done, self-sufficient, and then bring in the next group in. So, again, a very concentrated effort. Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. Yeah, I was just, that's awesome. I didn't know a lot of this stuff, but I would like to see 28 families instead of 15. That was my only point.
No, I think we're all
But may it work.
I think we're all in agreement with you. Of course, I was about to say, Michael, do you have anything else to say? And I was going to say, if the board members
and CARE, our vice chair of our housing authority.
Sure. I am.
I was privileged to attend the Colorado Housing Conference this last fall in Vail. For us, had to go to Vail for that conference, and I attended every session I could. There weren't quite enough hours in those 4 days to attend everything. But one of the things that really impressed me was I was hearing from housing authorities all over Colorado that the most success they have with people who need housing is when they give supportive services alongside, and the trend is to move more and more and more into supportive services. Now, as a housing authority, we can't do all that. We just can't. But here in this community, we have a lot of other agencies that we work in cooperation with who provide those services, and that is one of the keys, I think, to Longmont's success, is that we are working cooperatively. It's not, I don't see a turf problem here, but people say, oh, well, maybe that agency could help us with that, or that one could help us with that. And our staff is always on the lookout for funding from wherever we can get it. We got some private funding from the St. John's Foundation. That's a church foundation, to do some of the things we've done. So we're always looking for funding in different places so we can do the providing of supportive services as well as housing.
Darren or Chris?
My name is Darren Anson. I'm chair of the Longmont Housing Authority. Just a couple of comments. Last time we were here, we spoke to the fact that the continued Fed cuts that we're seeing in Section 8 housing, and how we as an agency have been trying to move more to asset-based acquiring properties, managing those appropriately, and that will continue. The other thing I'd just like to comment on, I'd like to thank all of the board members and especially Lynn Shirk, who's since been off the board, all of his contributions, and Michael and his staff, done an excellent job this year. But I think the other thing we also have to keep in mind, the Housing Authority is focused primarily on housing, and it's a reactive services. It's the people that need immediate needs, et cetera. And I think that's a very important place. It's really what our mission is. But we also have to look at the other side too. It really comes down to the jobs, people's ability to make funds to support their lives. So we have to look at it. We are on the reactive side of things, and I also want council to also remember that the jobs piece is really promoting jobs in the community is really the way that you can sustain the most poverty-stricken portion of our community. So on it, we talk a lot about what we do as reactive services, and I think Michael and staff do an excellent job, but there's also a big component about how do you stop that demand for those services continuing. The RISE program's initially really good. It still has a year to go to kind of see some of the outcomes, but there's also got to be other measures too. How do we stop that supply or demand for the services continue to come in? Because we're not going to be able to fill the supply. With supply, we're not going to be able to keep up with the demand. So.
I just wanted to say how excited I am. It's a 5-year term on this board, and I'm very excited to be a part of it, and I'm incredibly impressed with the people that I've met and the support that I feel from the city. I've lived here since 1976. Don't count how old I am. And I'm very proud to be a part of it. So looking forward to the next 5 years. Thank you.
Well, I have the pleasure of now being the council liaison to the LHA, and while I knew some, Michael, you took me around and we had a tour, and I have a feeling my education is going to be broadly expanded, so I'm really looking forward to that. I've always found that you guys have done a very good job with the money that you're provided, and also trying to look to see what's the best next step for the future, whether it's the suites or any other potential project down the line or piece of land that may come up. I'm very comfortable with the staff that's there and the board that we have in place right now. And I know one member has been ill, and I wish him the best. So, keep up the good work. And we got one more. I think we got one more question from Councilmember Levis.
Actually, not a question, but I understand James Johnson has been ill. Can you please pass along our wishes for getting stronger and back to full recovery?
He'll appreciate that.
I know he's had some challenges, and for meeting him over the years, he's very dedicated to this housing authority.
I will absolutely do that. And many people know him from his years as postal delivery man, I believe. And just as we wrap up, I want to make sure I thank the board. They volunteer their time and expertise, and it makes my job easier and strengthens my commitment. But also, I would like to call out to my staff. They are tremendous. They're quietly running a program that is crazy at the regulatory level of the Section 8 program. The properties are always in great shape. I always tell them, most people experience what we do by driving by our properties. So keeping them clean and proper looking is not a hard thing. So I want to call out I have an excellent staff behind me and a board working with me. And I also cannot let this opportunity go by without thanking Kathy and the city staff. But more importantly, this is the last official meeting we'll have before Gordon leaves us in the community, and he's been highly supportive of the Housing Authority activities while I've been there over the years. So thank you, Gordon.
Michael, we have one more. Councilmember Samori.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I just want to say I really enjoyed serving on the board with you and the board members, and I would like to second what Councilmember Santos said. You guys do a tremendous job, and you bring a lot of value to the community, so thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Kathy?
I just want to, remind council that on February 27th at 5:30, the Circle leaders will be hosting an elected officials forum, and 10 of the circle leaders are RISE participants. So that's the next step. They've gone through getting ahead, and now 10 of them have become new circle leaders. We met last night to walk through the presentations, and I have to say, for their second meeting, so this is only the second time they've been in this circle group, all of them volunteered to either speak or greet or do something. I just could not believe that. I figured for the second meeting they would be having their head down and not want to volunteer to do anything, but every single one of them volunteered to do something. So if you can at all attend from 5:30 to 7:30 at First United Methodist Church at 11th and Francis? No, 11th and Kimbark. Thank you. They're going to talk about some of the experiences that they've had living in poverty that I think will really inform you guys about things you may never have heard before or that you want to take into consideration as you're making policy decisions.
Kathy, can you also send that to us via email since
Yep.
Mayor Coombs isn't here?
Yep.
So you can have that opportunity as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, board. Keep up the hard work. Keep up the good work. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
You have it on a jump drive?
Council the results of our recently completed water demand evaluation. This evaluation looks at the future water demands for the city of Longmont and really takes it out to complete build out of the city so that we have a good idea of where we need to go with our water supply planning. Before I get into the slideshow, I'd like to introduce a little bit about the process of how we did the study, and then also with us tonight, I'd like to introduce some of the staff members and consultants who have worked on this study. Mark McLean with Deer and Alt completed the water supply evaluation portion of the study, looking at taking the demands and plugging them into our current water portfolio. And Hollyworth with Sage Trim Hill actually put together the bulk of the study, helped us with all the technical aspects of the study. And then in the audience, we have John Robb with our engineering division. John really deserves the credit for a lot of the really heavy number crunching on this study. We did quite a bit of the evaluation in-house, and John did an incredible job of pulling all the data together. It was an incredible amount of data and effort that he did. Also, we have two members of the Water Board, Vice Chair Darcy Juday and Dave Swenson, our board member of Water Board, who during the completion of this report, Water Board met many times with staff to go over and help us develop the background criteria for this. And so probably really an unprecedented effort on Water Board's part for the amount of effort and time they took at looking at this. One of the things inherent in the process of doing a future water demand is really to look at the underlying assumptions that you use when you do the demand. And Water Board was very instrumental in helping us look at those foundational decisions that need to be made so we could use that in our process. The first item I'd like to do is I'll go ahead and I don't know if you have the slideshow on your monitor or not. There we go. The first thing we wanted to do is kind of tie this effort in tonight with the pre-session that we did with City Council on January 10th, where we talked about our general water supply and utility planning efforts. In that effort, we kind of highlighted this graph here indicates the different efforts the City of Longmont has done since really the 1950s in our planning efforts. Generally, our planning efforts go about once a decade. We look at our raw water supply, we look at our treated water system, we look at our water demands, and continue to review those over time to make sure that as we're progressing forward, we're able to keep up to date with current data and trends. Jumping back, I guess before I get into the presentation, I'll apologize a little bit. I have a little more data than you normally would want in a presentation, but that it's almost necessary for this type of a study because it's really a data-driven study. Wanted to just to show council in the audience, Longmont has for a number of years done studies. This graph, at least from an engineer standpoint, is kind of neat because you can see the heavy blue line right in the middle is the actual water use data from really the 1930s up to present. And then each one of the lines as you go along are new studies about done every 10 years. So as you can kind of see, the studies generally trend what our demand is. About every 10 years you kind of readjust the 0 point, but you continue on with studying. As you look further to the right on this, you can see demand projections, and these go to build out. One of the things we've done in this study, about a decade ago, the city had looked at its build out and at that time had contemplated build-out of the community about 2048. And so we left, that was one of the underlying assumptions, we left that date the same. And I only bring that up because that kind of tends to change the slope of your future demand, but that's not terribly important because that build-out will occur as it happens. What was most important for us is to start the study was to look at our historical trends. This graph, I believe, is a real good indication of, it has on the blue line shows the trend of water demand starting in 1970 to present, so over the last 40 years. You can see the increasing demand. We've also overlain the per capita use of water, so you can see that while the demand has been going up, as you would expect as the city grows, the actual per capita demand has been going down and been going down at a fairly constant rate. You really can kind of look at the data and see some interesting trends. If you look from 1970 to 1980, the data is much more variable. We had more large water users. For example, the Great Western Sugar Factory was operating at the time. And then it shut down in the mid to late 1970s. And because it didn't have the big campaigns year to year that with fluctuations, and we had, we've improved our reliability of our system. You can then look at the period from 1980 to 1995, where we had a fairly steady, a much lower variability. And then finally, if you look at the data from about 1995 to present, the last kind of third of this, you can see a much more general downward trend. So one of the things we wanted to do was look at that. You really don't want to develop a study based on just recent data, because different variables can kind of skew what you do. So you want to be able to look at that full 40-year period, but you also want to explore certain trends. So we then looked at the trend from 2000 to 2010, kind of what's happening and where it's going. So finally, this graph, which shows the water treatment plant production, which has actually slightly dipped in the last 10 years, even though we have had some growth in that period. And then the bottom line is the per capita production, which has actually even gone down a little bit faster, greater slope than the water treatment plant production, because as the population increases, that does tend to bring down that per capita consumption. So these are some of the things that we look at when we actually got into the study. To talk a little bit about the process of the study, as we discussed in our pre-study session, the very foundational underlying document that guides this study is our Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan. That plan identifies where Longmont will grow, and most importantly for the planning process of the study effort, it identifies the zoning. That's particularly important because zoning is one of the primary drivers for water demand. Depending upon the zoning of a property, its water demand can actually change quite a bit. So in your packet, we've developed, we have the executive summary for the study, and we've developed really two forecasts. The first forecast we call the reference forecast. The reference forecast is where the real heavy number crunching occurs, and it's your base, what we call, it's similar to a base forecast, where you take just simply, where the lots, the water demand, the future water demand, that type of thing, and develop a forecast based on that. Then you go into what's called an adjusted water demand forecast. That effort is where you look at any changes, you look at your underlying assumptions, and you look at things that affect
future water demand and adjust your reference forecast, which is your base forecast, by those factors. So one of the first efforts, and we were lucky enough to be able to do this, in conjunction with Water Board, looking at some of these assumptions, we had to develop some baseline assumptions to do the reference forecast. I won't go through all of them, but just a few of them. As I just mentioned, the LPA was the basis for the forecast. We also determined that undeveloped parcels within existing developments will develop in a similar fashion as the surrounding parcels, and that the unit rate of consumption that we will apply will remain consistent with existing demands. So you can kind of see how you're building a baseline reference forecast with these assumptions. There are no significant new high water use industrial users will be added in the system. And some of these are adjusted of course, in the adjusted forecast, but to get our base forecast, that there will be no regulatory climate or law changes that would affect water use or supply. Climate variability will not affect it, and the city will have no new outside water service outside of what we already have. And we understand a lot of those factors have to be looked at and reviewed, but to get the base forecast, we wanted to not have any adjustments because of that. So to perform the initial reference forecast, again, I'd like to credit John Robb, our staff engineer. What he did was most water demand forecasts are done simply by taking a large aggregate area, and the more sophisticated an evaluation to do, the more you kind of narrow in on small parcels. In the case of this study, and then once you identify those, you apply a unit rate of consumption. You just say so many gallons per acre or per population. Some people just use populations. We wanted to be a little more sophisticated and accurate, so John was able to take our GIS system, and in our geographical information system, he was able to bring in all the Boulder County and Weld County, but all of the parcels, and then apply a zoning to those, and then on top of those, apply the water records for our existing customers, and then apply that same use rate to those that are not developed. And so really, well over 30,000 parcels were melded together in that way to come up with a much more accurate evaluation. This on table ES5 of the document, page 41 of your council packet, we have the reference forecast outlined there. Just for kind of reference, the Boulder County parcels, that reference forecast was 21,000 acre feet. Other parcels that were included in that were like Weld County at 400, export to the town line, some of those. They were a little bit more minor, so you can kind of see the bulk, as we all know, the bulk of Longmont is in Boulder County. So that applying those total metered demands to those parcels resulted in about 23,000 acre feet reference forecast. That's the water kind of that goes out the tap, out the meter. You also have to look at other uses, for example, what we call authorized uses, say flushing of fire hydrants, firefighting, bulk water, those type of things. Those accounted for another couple hundred acre feet, about 1%. And then system loss, no matter how good or new a pipe system you have. And Longmont is lucky to have a fairly new water system. A good portion has been built since the 1970s, more modern pipe material. We're at about 7.2% water loss. That's leakage at joints. You can never get a system completely set, that's about 1,800 acre feet. And so the total treated water demand then really, what we're looking at coming out of the water treatment plants is just a little bit shy of 24,000 acre feet. So that's the number based on our reference forecast with no adjustments yet of what we would need to put out. So then the next step we did was to take on table ES8, which is on page 44 of your packet, we took the reference forecast of about 25,000 acre feet, and we subtracted out that amount of water that exported to the town of Lyons, because we need that number in there when we evaluate, say, treatment plant capacity and those type of things, because we do have to treat that water. But for a raw water supply, you don't need that, because the town of Lyons by contract provides us that water. So that amount is taken out. And then to get kind of from the water treatment plant to the true raw water side, your water rights, your water in your storage reservoirs, you have to take into account the losses that you experience from the supply side to the treatment plant. That's about, as well as loss in the treatment process itself. So we have that at 5%, about another 1,200 acre feet. So our total raw water demand to supply water to the water treatment plants is 25,100 acre feet. Then in addition to that, there are other raw water uses that we have that do not involve treated water. A good example is both the Ute Creek Golf Course and the Twin Peaks Golf Course are watered with raw water. Many of our parks are watered with raw water. We have leases and exchanges. We have return flow obligations. Many different uses of water beyond what we use at our water treatment plants. We did an evaluation. Most of that water we actually are able to use what we call our downstream water, primarily water that is used once by Longmont. We treat it at our wastewater plant and then release it back to the river. Some of that water we don't have second use capability, but some of it we do. We can reuse, and we can reuse it to extinction. So we're able to use that water for many of these raw water uses, but some of the uses are above where we can get that water to, and some are at times where we do need to use a little bit of water. So we estimated about another 1,900 acre feet of water necessary for non-potable water uses, for a total reference forecast of 27,000 acre feet. That number is then then we apply our variability assumptions and adjust that number to get what we call the adjusted water demand forecast. At that point in the study, once we'd kind of taken all of John's data, we turned it over to C.H. Hill, and Holly and her firm helped us in conjunction with Water Board look at those variabilities, and I'll let Holly kind of describe how we go from the reference forecast to the adjusted forecast. I'd like to introduce Holly Worth.
Thanks, Ken.
Welcome, Holly.
Thank you. All right, so Ken described the development of the reference forecast, which is the first step in a two-step approach that we use to develop the water demand forecast. The second step is to develop the adjusted forecast. The adjusted forecast is important because it incorporates the variability of the assumptions that have the potential to impact water requirements. It's also important to note that these assumptions can be modified, and in fact, they're meant to be customized by the city over time. So Longmont can add, remove, adjust assumptions as conditions change for the city. It's just an opportunity for the city to really fine-tune their water demand forecast. I also wanted to mention that the two-step approach is a widely used standard practice, and in fact, it's documented in a reference that we used during the study
from the AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association. It's a reference called Forecasting Urban Water Demand. So it is a standard practice that many utilities use. So the variable parameters that we included in this evaluation are in table ES7. There we go. Ooh, small print. And I think it's page 43 of the council packet. So this list, as Ken mentioned, was also reviewed with Water Board, and it was a collaborative effort to determine these adjustments. So I'm only going to go over a few. There is more detail on each assumption in the full report, and so I was just going to touch on a few that might be of interest. So the first one I'll talk about is assumption 1 deals with redevelopment focus areas. So Longmont has 4 redevelopment focus areas that are currently identified. So the idea for this adjustment is it assumes that the rate of consumption for those redevelopment areas is consistent with a mixed use type of area, like a land use that's a mixed use, something similar to the Prospect area. So you can see that the assumption we made actually doesn't have a huge impact on the demand on the reference forecast. It's just a small negative number, but we just wanted to show that that was the assumption that was being made for those redevelopment focus areas. I'll jump down to assumption number 5. This one deals with industrial economic development, those land use areas and their conversion to residential or mixed use. So for this evaluation, we assumed that no IED land use areas outside of the ones that may have been in the redevelopment focus areas would be converted to residential or mixed use land areas. So you can see we have under the recommended column a 0 for that. So I'll use an example. I was here a few weeks ago when Mill Village was being discussed. So that's an example of, I believe it was an industrial area that would be converted to high-density residential. Now it's a small, portion, a small area, but that's something that would then have to be accounted for. It would show up in the, like Ken mentioned, the LACP. That land use area would change, and so it would impact the water demand evaluation. So while that may be one small area, if you have many, many areas changing from a lower water use to a higher water use, it will add up over time. So that's just an example of how this assumption relates to what is really going on currently. So I'll skip down to assumption number 8, which is it's also related to assumption number 14 to address the climate variability and its impact on irrigation demand. So for this assumption, there was data that was taken from a Front Range climate study. It was input into a climate model, and the result was that the model estimated that an 8% increase in irrigation demand as a result of climate variability. So that's the number that's reflected here, is 8% of the total treated water demand. It was also applied to number 14, which is the raw water that's used for raw water irrigation. So it's the same, it's all water. This one happens to be raw water that's used for irrigation. So we have it accounted for there that would also go up by 8% as a result of climate variability. Number 9 is an assumption that we call the dry year adjustment. So this basically is an assumption that accounts for additional water use by customers during a year that may be a little bit more dry than the previous one. And in Longmont's experience, it's about 5% of the total treated water demand. So that is a line item here, and we have that accounted for. Item number 10, the assumption is called future savings from water conservation. So there is a planned savings of the city of about 3,500 acre feet, which is documented in the water conservation plan that was done in 2008. So this evaluation here assumes that half of those water savings have been achieved so far, and that there's another half yet to be realized. So that's why it's a negative number. It lowers it half of the 3,500. So it's saying that we're still going to, the water conservation is going to have that impact on the forecast. So actually, the city is doing a small study right now to I guess, to see if this is a good assumption, how much water conservation has actually been achieved. So they are going to, these assumptions, as time goes on, will need to be checked, and that's one that the city is looking at right now. So when you add up all of these recommended adjustments, you have the final total variability of 5,640 acre feet. So that is the number that gets added to the reference forecast. Oh, okay. There we go, which is in the next page on this table ES8. So you can see Ken went over the numbers that are all summarized in this table. The total, the reference forecast, and then adding Lyons, and then you get down to the reference forecast for the total raw water demand is 27,000 acre feet. That's what you add the adjusted forecast to. So when you add about 5,600 acre feet, you come up with 32,720 acre feet approximately. So that's where the final water demand forecast has come from. And I guess I guess if there's any questions on any of the other assumptions, I can answer them while I'm up here.
Councilmember Levison.
Thank you. When you look at the mid-range recommended variability, what are the two extremes? If you're looking at mid-range, can you give us an idea of, worst case scenarios and best case scenarios? Because wouldn't that change some of the change some numbers pretty radically one way or another?
Yeah, so I guess if you're talking about the ranges of each of those assumptions, we do give a range in that table, in table ES7. So we are, the range is, on the low end, it's 3,000 acre feet. All the way up to the high end is 13,000 acre feet. So there's certainly a lot of, you can look at some of the bigger numbers that would get it that high, and like assumption 11 is the factor of safety. So that's one that has the potential to have a big impact, but that's a number that's, it's a factor of safety, and I think communities look at that as something that adds, I guess, a cushion, but it also is very dependent on the level of detail you have in your forecast. So a community that doesn't have a lot of detail in their water demand forecast may have a factor of safety that's as high as 20%, to account for the lack of detail. So here we have 5%, but so there is the range there of 3,000 to 13,000 acre feet, and I think the idea is just keep looking at these assumptions and seeing what is the recommendation that's the appropriate for Longmont.
And I guess the other question I have is, I don't remember if we were presented with and had an opportunity to read the climate variability report. I know that I've just read an article recently on estimations of how much the temperature could rise in the summertime, and wondering whether or not, if people are really off on those numbers, if we end up with more than 2 to 3 degree, well, I guess some of the assumptions are just 1 or 2 degrees, but if we do end up with some superheating, you might have to change your variability plus your assumptions, because we'll have many more fires, we'll have need for much more irrigation. So I'm wondering, have you looked at the variability of, in case there's a fudge factor, if you will, for the climate variations that might be outside the scope of what was predicted?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem and Council Member Levinson. We did look at that, and that's really where these numbers come from. And you are correct, we have not brought that study forward. we got these numbers from a study was titled the Front Range Climate Change Vulnerability Study, and it was done by most of the Front Range of Colorado, including Cheyenne, not Colorado, but the Front Range water providers all the way from Pueblo and Colorado Springs, Denver, Aurora, Longmont, Boulder, Fort Collins, made an joint effort, because it's quite an effort to do that study. We're able to get grant funding through the American Water Works Association, but because that study got grant funding, the actual copyright is held by AWWA, and they're in the process of publishing that report, but they can't release it, otherwise they lose their copyright. Right, and so as soon as they officially release that study, we'll be able to bring that forward. Nevertheless, that study took an extremely comprehensive look at, and I apologize, I don't remember the number, but it was literally hundreds of the climate models. Every climate model that that most of the science is using right now, and it categorized those, from warm to hot, and then from cool to wet to dry, and what we did with this study was take the median of most of those studies, and the range that's in this document. We kind of went over to the left side of the range and took, a cooler, wetter scenario. We took the middle scenario, and we took a hotter, drier. And so you are correct. Which one of those models is used will greatly change that actual model. But since we really don't have any basis for using anything other than what is, what I would say is kind of the average of those studies, that is why that was chosen for this. And the nice thing, the reason we set up this table, this variability assumption table, is so that as we know whether it's climate variability, whether it's economic development, any of those issues, we're able to continually go in and adjust those variables and narrow the range and be more precise. And so we'll continue to do that as more, whether it's climate variability, more climate science comes out, or as economic development occurs, or as new ideas come forth, we're able to put that in. So we're real comfortable. We're comfortable with kind of the mid-range, and we spent a little bit of time with Water Board trying to make sure everybody was comfortable with that, where we were in that range to come up with that number.
And I guess the other question I had is, have we looked at, when you were showing all the different demand and production lines, did you ever match up some of those with major changes to the comp plan from the last time or the updates were assumed up to 2010, but can you look at it from the changes that have been made since the comp plan updated 02 and compare the land use changes and what the impact would be on ones that were more or less intense than what they had been called for in the LACP? Like in the case of Mill Village, I mean, how many transitions have we had from, light industrial into residential, and how many more of those can we bear before we have to start, re-updating the assumptions? Is it 1,000 units? Is it 2,000 or 3,000?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Levinson. The version of the LPA that we used was the latest version as of July 27th, 2010. And so Mill, I'd have to check with the planning department. Mill Village is the only one I know of that's changed since then, and that was a small enough parcel that, it wouldn't even fit in the kind of the error range of a study this large. But that is our intent is to continue to monitor any changes to the LPA as reflected in this study. But the data we used was in the 2008, 2009, 2010 period is what we use. So we feel we're very current on data, very current on development. You know, we did one of the variability assumptions was variability assumption number 2 was an adjustment for partially developed or partially occupied parcels. So we did understand that there are some subdivisions that are partially built. There's properties that are probably currently well underutilized for the economy, those type of things. So we tried to take that into account with that variability assumption number 2.
And I guess just from the meeting I went to last week on the First in Main, it looks like the consultants are recommending some land use changes in the area of the transit zone. So I'm wondering, that hasn't happened yet, but how do you forecast? I guess you forecast with what you indicated before is looking for something like assuming Prospect with in one of these forecast the assumptions you had. You mentioned that. I can't remember which one it is now.
Yeah, actually,
What was an assumption?
Councilmember Lemon, so we, as part of the reference forecast, we did look specifically at what the city has termed its redevelopment focus areas. And so those areas, I can't tell, I won't be able to name them all off, but it's basically the Main Street corridor area. It's the mall redevelopment area. It's the Sugar Mill, Midtown, and also that transit area. So we used data from the redevelopment focus area efforts to come up with the numbers. So we believe those numbers are probably pretty close to what we'll see. Obviously, we wouldn't want to in any way inhibit the community's wishes and ideas for that area, because we certainly want it to be community driven. But if in fact it's a little bit different than what the original focus areas, will certainly be able to accommodate that. Yes.
Thanks for answering the questions.
Councilmember Witt.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It seems to me that everything seems to be in order, and is there going to be enough capacity to sell water to Firestone?
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Witt, there is currently no numbers. In fact, if you go back to one of our basic assumptions in the reference forecast, one of our basic assumptions was Longmont would have no new outside water taps. And so essentially the answer is no, there is not any capacity in this study effort or in our planning effort for outside water taps, large outside water taps.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. Just before I ask my questions, why is that a bad thing if we sell water to Firestone? That's a question to understand. I'm just curious. Is it? I haven't heard that before, but based on some public comments tonight, that's a bad thing. And just curious as to, yeah, I'll let you answer that.
Councilmember Witt.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. There are some people in our community who feel that we are just building capacity in order to sell water to Firestone, and that our residents are bearing the burden of the cost to build up the infrastructure, and then just going to turn around and sell water to another municipality without regaining any. And I'm sure others in the community who actually feel strongly about that could clarify that, but in essence, that's, I think, the argument.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you again, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. So I guess my question is, first of all, I recognize you're the experts. You've forgotten more about this than I will ever learn. So we'll not pretend to be an expert, but I'm just kind of curious. In the event that you're wrong on the variable assumptions and we need more water, my question is, what's the cost of having too much capacity? Meaning that, I mean, on the outside, if you look at the 13,505 on the high end of your variable assumptions, and you did have a plan that ultimately was able to have 43,200 acre feet. What is the cost of getting there? What's the cost of maintaining it? And the questions, let's start with that.
Yes, Mayor and Councilmember Bagley, there's obviously the cost, the infrastructure cost. If we estimate a little high, then we might acquire a little more water, a little more infrastructure than we would need. If we estimate a little low, then we will have to, in the future, go out and acquire additional water. I don't want to steal all of Mark's thunder here. He will give us a rundown of our supply evaluation. But the short answer is that we have sufficient projects on the books that it's possible we won't need to do all the projects, and there are water rights available, and there are Longmont's in a really enviable position that if we need more water in the future, an example could be a very large industrial water user that bring in economic development to the city that the city really wants. You bring them in, you need to go get more water. The real enviable position that Longmont has is there are projects and there are water availability that we can get at a future date, even if we haven't identified it now. It would cost money to do that, but we'll do that. If, in fact, we slightly overestimate and we find out, 30 or 40 years from now, we have a little bit extra water. In essence, what we've done is developed a system that's slightly more robust and dependable. Keeping in mind, Longmont years ago, for years and decades, have used a 100-year drought, and we formalized that in 1990 with City Council. We formalized the 100-year drought as the drought, that occurs, a 1% chance of happening in a year. For Longmont's 7-year long drought. We formalized that as that's what all these kind of our water supply numbers come out of. And so if we have a little bit more water, then if we have a 200-year drought, we got a little bit, we get a little closer to that. History has proven that we can have droughts much longer and more extended than we've had. But the cost, you kind of have to draw a line, and for Longmont, it's a 100-year drought. Some communities use 50 years. Some communities use other ones. But if we have a little more, then they're slightly more robust and a little better safety factor. So, we'd advocate that's not a bad thing. So.
And can we legally save it, like a bank account? So my understanding is that, well, first of all, what you just said, just to recap, so what you're saying is if we need more water, and you are wrong on industrial use, we can always build it in the future if council's willing to invest those funds, okay? And then second, my question is, can we legally save it, like a bank account? And if so, can we sell it, and do we have the right to use it?
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Bagley, each type of water supply has a slightly different answer there, but in essence, for example, if we invested in infrastructure such as a reservoir or a pipeline system or a pumping system, a hard infrastructure, then certainly that's a project that will yield well into the future for us. Water rights are a little bit different. But in essence, once when we acquire water rights, we go through water court and we get a change of the underlying water right to allow us to use it municipally and at our system. And once we've done that, at least currently, there's a legal theory of res judicata that court case is final. There's always efforts out there to kind of chip away at Western water law, and there are federal actions, endangered species, those type of things that could chip away at that. But generally we put that water to use. The second half of the question is whether or not we could sell it. Obviously, water rights, as well as infrastructure, are property rights owned by Longmont that could be sold. We do have a charter restriction that requires affirmative vote of the citizens of Longmont. So while that is possible, that's a pretty big hurdle to overcome, and certainly, you'd leave that up to your citizens. If they want to, if they wanted to do that, then you'd want to do that. If they didn't, you wouldn't. So, but that wouldn't really even be a staff or council decision. That'd be up to an election of the.
So your recommendation is it's enough. If we need more, we can build more, and even if we built more right now, not going to do us any good. That's basically what you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like next to introduce Mark McLean with Deer Nault. The second half of this effort was to take these numbers and then put them into our current water supply to see how that fits, and Mark will describe that effort.
Hello, Mark. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. My efforts are described in a task memorandum that I believe you have in your packets, and essentially my job was to take the demands as they were developed by the consultant and the city, then evaluate them against our available water supplies currently to look at a baseline situation, and then in the future, as the system develops naturally under policies that are currently in place, like the raw water acquisition policy that Longmont has had since the 60s, and then also to evaluate other projects and the need for meeting demand. So we've talked about the 32,700 acre feet of demand that was considered. That was the demand that I modeled for the city. In addition, the city supplies water through various agreements. It's also described in the task memorandum. And during the 100-year drought, depending on the yields of water rights available to us at the time, those demands range from about 4,300 to as much as 6,800 acre feet a year. Some of them are straight leases, some of them are partnership agreements where essentially we can supply water from, say, Union Reservoir or our wastewater treatment plant to a downstream user who has a high-quality upstream supply of water that can be provided to the city of Longmont. So that's included in those demands. Those were also evaluated in the modeling. The modeling also takes a look at the legal uses of water rights and what are required by our decrees. When we change water rights from irrigation to municipal uses, as Ken alluded to, there comes certain obligations with that. Historically, when rights were used for irrigation, part of that water returned to the stream and satisfied downstream water rights. That protection has to be maintained. That's an obligation for a water user such as a city, and that obligation is modeled in the analysis as well. We did include, as part of the variability assumptions, the climate change, and that number was the average of 112 global climate models adjusted and downscaled to local conditions. And you see on page 3 in figure 1 of your memorandum, there's a chart there that shows that expected increase in grass, basically consumptive use under a warmer and drier climate represented by the averages that the models would predict. And Holly mentioned that's 8% of the demand. It's 18% of the summertime irrigation demand at 2040. And I reported that at 2070, which is how far some of the modeling runs out, those increases are actually at 28% rather than 18. So, if it continues, there is an expectation of a higher demand further in the future. So in figure 2 of your report was the baseline condition. What we did was we said if we didn't do anything else to Longmont's system right now as it will naturally grow in the future, what would the demand that we could support look like? And I think this one. So this figure shows that during the 9 years that are evaluated, and the 9 years consist of an average year on either end with a 7-year-long, 1 in 100-year drought sandwiched in between. This is how the supplies end up getting allocated to meeting our demands. And what you can see is that during the first 7 years of the analysis, the demand is fully met, and during the last 2 years, there's a small shortage. It's good to see that the shortage is small, but there is, under our planning criteria, there would be a shortage at build-out of the LPA as projected. So then we looked at 3 different projects to see if they would increase the water supply so that the projected build-out demand would be met. One was Windy Gap firming. When that was, the project was added 6,000 acre-feet of storage in a new reservoir that provides about 2,500 acre-feet a year of additional firm yield to the city of fully consumable water. That's basically the most usable kind, the most versatile kind of water that we can attain or obtain. And that analysis shows that in those last 2 years, having had that supply allows us to keep storage more full during the drought and meet our demands all the way through the planning period. We also took a look at the Union Reservoir raw water pipeline, and these projects are projects that have been evaluated in previous master planning efforts as well, so we wanted to take a new look at them. And your task memorandum describes the Union Reservoir raw water pipeline would also be an alternative to meet the full demand at build-out, as with Windy Gap. I did want to note that for that pipeline to be able to do that, it does have to be completed to the water treatment plants. The first phase of it takes it to the rough and ready ditch. It doesn't allow us to meet full demand at that phase yet. And we also looked at Union Reservoir enlargement by itself. That's been a project that's been considered over the years, and just increasing the size of that bucket doesn't allow us to quite fill that demand right at the end either. It's because we need to have water at the right time and in the right place to meet our demands. And storage down there, while it can be useful, doesn't quite fill in that gap right at the end of the planning period. So that was quick. Entertain any questions, or I think the whole team would be happy to answer questions as well.
Anybody have any questions? Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I'm just curious as to why in 2050 there's no Windy Gap water on a couple of those charts.
In the baseline scenario, I think, is probably where you see that one, Councilmember
In
Finley.
Figure 2 and in Figure 4.
Correct. Without Windy Gap firming, Windy Gap doesn't yield every year. In some years, the water right doesn't come into priority. It's too junior to be able to get water from the river. In other years, interestingly, wet years, facilities without the firming project, the CBT facilities that Windy Gap shares, can be full, and there's no room to put Windy Gap water into. So again, it doesn't yield.
Anyone else? So with the Union Reservoir pipeline, that's water that we'd have to pump back, as well as the enlargement of the reservoir. It's not as ready to go as Windy Gap, as far as being drinkable or usable quickly. I'm correct?
Mayor Pro Tem Santos, yes, that is correct. Probably one of the best attributes of the Windy Gap firming project is that it's above our treatment plants. It's high quality mountain water directly piped in from that facility to our treatment plants. So it does, there are some quality and system redundancy advantages that we receive from that project that we don't from others. That is correct.
And right now, this is assuming that we are in an allocation of about 6,000 acre feet. What are we planning? What is our participation? I want to say 10, but
Mayor Pro Tem, we're currently in the permitting phase at 12,000 acre feet. At the most recent City Council retreat last January, early February, council directed us to continue to plan at the next phase of the project is the design phase, and in that phase, for a number of years, we've been looking at participating in the 8 to 10,000 acre foot range. The nice thing about this study, because of the little bit lower numbers, we even talked a little bit about that at the council retreat last February. We're able to stretch that range out to the 6 to 10,000, but a little bit of potential infrastructure savings there. But yeah, we're in it at 12,000 through the permitting because that mostly because the EIS has taken a number of years, and we're hopefully now that the report is out, we're hopefully nearly complete with that process.
And then later on, we can decide exactly where, what acre feet we need to be at as far as 6 to 10 to 12.
That is correct. The two logical times are when we come back for the next large portion of the project, which is design, so at design level, and then also after it's designed and it's bid out and you have an actual bid construction number, we would have another agreement for participation in the construction, and at that point we'd have another chance to look at that. So we'll have two more chances to look at that.
Thanks, Ken. Councilmember Levison.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Some of the assumptions about I guess we have to look at the investment weight of Windy Gap as opposed to the capacity to do the full pump back project, the pipeline, and then what our chances are, and is it the same long range of a project to do the reservoir enlargement? Because if it's taken this amount of time to get to the EIS stage of Windy Gap, when we have to, as a city, be a single entity dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers and various options, and whether or not the expansion of the reservoir is actually engineeringly, is that a correct term? Engineeringly possible with the Corps of Engineers to approve. I'm trying to weigh, is one a bird in the hand and the other one's in the bush? I mean, is it Union Reservoir almost as long a timeline as Windy Gap, the enlargement rather?
Yes, Councilmember Levinson, that's a very good observation. We have said for a number of years that while the Union Reservoir enlargement would be, we originally were going to have that as our next project. And then when the Windy Gap Firming project started up in 2000 to 2002, and we looked at the benefits of that, and the regional cooperation that project derived, we at that time said, well, we will kind of reprioritize, and council decided to reprioritize, and we're looking at the Windy Gap Firming project. But that is a very good point. We will have to look at design, permitting, all those types of issues with Union, and once the federal government decides on its permit issuance decision, which is expected literally in the next few months, that gives us, we hope, that gives us a project that is, once it's been permitted, that a lot more certainty in that project. And when we come back with that that evaluation to participate in the design, we expect that towards the end of this year. We hope, once the permit's issued, once we need to get a new allotment contract with the federal government. There are a few other items that have to happen before the design begins, but it's hoped that process will start towards the end of the year, early next year. And at that point, we will certainly bring that issue, that as well as other evaluations for council to consider. So
that's for Windy Gap specifically, though. That project you're speaking of, not, or do you get, or will we have some decision making on Windy Gap where we'll be able to have you give us numbers and timelines on the pump back project, the raw water pipeline and pump back project, and the reservoir enlargement? And those would be kind of three balls juggling in the air then.
Yes, Councilmember Levinson. I believe we'll have sufficient data to give to council so that when you make a decision on Windy Gap, you're able to look at, the pump back pipeline, union enlargement, other water resource projects. We'll certainly be able to bring that data so that can be all kind of be evaluated when we make that decision.
And so can you maybe explain one thing that I thought I heard when another council member asked a question about Windy Gap, that on very wet years, Windy Gap, we wouldn't be able to actually firm everything we would get for Windy Gap because of the other big Thompson water would fill up every reservoir, and then you actually can't let it, your cup could be full, but it can't runneth over.
Yes,
is that true?
That is true. That's the situation today. When Windy Gap pumps, it pumps into Lake Granby on the west slope. It's the only reservoir in the CBG system that we're allowed to store in by contract with both the Northern Water District and the federal government. When that reservoir is full, while Windy Gap is a wet year, Windy Gap might be able to pump. It wouldn't do you any good to pump because as soon as you pumped it into Granby, it would spill because Granby's spilling, and so it would immediately spill and wouldn't do you any good. The beauty of the Windy Gap firming project is that reservoir is then sitting there available so that when you pump, you can put it in that reservoir as opposed to have it spill out of Granby. And in fact, this last summer was a good example. Very bountiful water year, an extremely extended runoff, one of the longest runoffs any of us can remember. And the Lake Granby actually spilled very late in the summer last year, but it spilled. There was water, Windy Gap water, stored in Lake Granby, and it did spill. We used as much as we could before it spilled. All the participants did, but some of it did spill. There is now no water in. It hasn't been any water since last July in Windy Gap water in the system. And even if it were to come, the system's likely to fill and possibly spill. Although as dry as it's been, that may not happen this year. But a good example is it could possibly happen again this year. And even if there were water available, we wouldn't be able to pump it this year. So that's the beauty of that firming project is in those wet years, you get to pump it and store it. In the average years, we would pump it, and even though it's an average year, we have water rights available on this side of the divide that we could rely more heavily on, and so we could store a little bit of that. And then in the dry years, we'd be able to use it. So that's the real beauty of that.
And in the dry years, the idea of having Windy Gap firmed up is that you could rely on that water, and in a dry year, CBT water would not be as plentiful? Is that correct?
That is correct. In the initial part of a 100-year drought, CBT is a supplemental water supply, so it does yield very well. They actually increase the quotas, but they deplete the system over time. And so towards the end of the drought, that's why in Mark's graphs you saw towards the end of that 7-year period, the Windy Gap use after it's firmed actually went up because that's when our CBT supplies start dwindling in other supplies. So yeah,
okay.
That's it.
I get the whole picture. Thanks.
Anyone else? Well, we have some recommendations that staff's looking for, so if anyone would like to make a motion on those recommendations.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Councilmember Bagley.
Yeah, I move that we accept the future water demand evaluation and raw water supply modeling as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay, let's vote. It passes 6-0 with Mayor Coombs absent. Ken, you have your marching orders.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And if I might, Greg, just 1 second. I also had one item that I brought, just an informational item I wanted to pass on to City Council. I've given the City Clerk a short memo that describes some of Longmont's bulk water leases. Longmont You've probably seen it occasionally, a truck pulling up to a fire hydrant and loading up. It's used for construction. Boulder County uses it to dust, to water down dirt roads, things like that. We have a program where we do allow some bulk water. There have been some questions in the community about does any of that water go to the oil and gas industry? And so what I did is just give you a short description of water rental programs, or the bulk water program that we do have. Actually, Longmont's got a pretty, compared to other communities, it's got a pretty small program. Total, all in 2011, we sold 18 acre-feet of water, out of our total demand this year of about 18,000 acre-feet. So pretty small demand. Of that 18 acre-feet, 1.9 acre-feet was used by haulers that do typically supply to the oil and gas industry. Not to say we know for sure that did go there, but most likely. So it's about 1 acre-foot a year. Kind of to put it in perspective, communities east of us that are really closer to the oil and gas fields, it's been reported to me that Greeley sells bulk water over around 1,000 acre-feet a year, and Fort Lupton around 450 acre-feet a year. So that's really where most of the oil and gas wells are in activity. And so I just wanted to give you that. It's just simply the data from some of our rentals.
Well, and I'm sure some members of the public would like it, so they can contact you to get a copy of this now that you've given it to council.
Yes, okay. They can contact the water department.
Okay.
Yes,
And the only other thing I have to mention to members of council, and I mention it quite often when we talk about water, is that Northern Water Conservancy District does a water tour in Eastern and Western Slope. That will probably happen in June and July, perhaps. The dates haven't been set yet. But also last year, Ken and Dale and several others took us on a Longmont water tour with members of the Environmental Board and Water Board. And I would encourage, one, I'd like to do that again. But I also would encourage that if that does happen, that members of council go on it as well, because it was very informative. So, thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Holly. Okay. We're near the end of our agenda, ladies and gentlemen. So, Mayor and council comments. Are there any? Councilmember Samore.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. One member of the audience thought that he was going to escape the embarrassment of his birthday being announced by not being here last week, and that would be Mr. Regal Deal. So I'd like to wish him a happy birthday, and so I'm not sure. The little bird that usually lands on my shoulder didn't tell me, but they could point in that direction, or they can volunteer on their own. Dale. All right, well, we'll sing birthday. Happy birthday. Come on, join in. I just did birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rigo. Happy birthday to you.
Councilmember Levison.
You're not really getting older. Last week, I think we all forgot that it was the beginning of the celebration of Chinese New Year. So I'd like to wish everybody a happy New Year, Year of the Dragon. It's supposed to be a very prosperous economic year, I think, as things go. And to remind everyone that there is going to be a Chinese New Year celebration this Saturday, and I think because of our commitment with our council team building event, we will not be there on time. So I note from our calendar it's at 2 p.m. Silver Creek High School. I think it ends at 5 is what I thought I read in the notice as well. So just wanted to remind folks of that, and wanted to tell Councilmember Bagley and Finley, who will attend the CML workshop training this Friday that I think you'll really enjoy it and get acquainted with the great staff at CML and have a extraordinary opportunity to learn from some very experienced elected officials who will, not just CML staff, but they do have some elected officials who will give you some clue on how they've managed to navigate all the time commitments and obligations of serving at this level of government. So good luck to you and enjoy the day.
Sure. Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. I would like to continue my business of the week by recognizing Ziggy's Coffee House. I've often used it as my auxiliary office. They have 3 locations now, 400 Kaufman, 1139 Francis Street, and a drive-through at 1729 Hover. They make excellent cappuccinos, of which I'm very fond, and I just want to encourage our community to go visit Ziggy's Coffee House.
Councilmember Samori.
Boy, she couldn't have timed that any better. Speaking of Ziggy's, we had a wonderful coffee with council at Ziggy's on Francis Street last Saturday. We had a great turnout, roughly about 40 people there, and it was very interactive. And I want to thank everybody that showed up, and make sure you show up at the end of this month for coffee with council as well.
Councilmember Witt.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just want to remind members of the public that next Tuesday we will not have a council meeting. And also, I found out something really interesting today. I happened by the Orange Door on Main Street, and they are going to be forming a nonprofit that is designed to help members in our community gain employment skills. And I am going to mess up the name because I forgot to bring the card with it, and I will bring that. But what really was encouraging to me is I love it when members of our community see a need, fill a need, and they will be working to outfit especially women in our community who are going to be looking for jobs. They are also going to be getting a makeover, and so that they have that professional look. And I'm just really thrilled that they're going to be working with the Hour Center and a couple other nonprofits in our community to address that need. So well done.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Santos. Just wanted you all to know I missed you last week. I was sending you love from Manitoba, and while you guys were having your meeting, which I had the honor and privilege of watching online later, while you were actually live, I was eating all-you-can-eat sushi. So I appreciate you allowing me to be absent. But in all seriousness, I'd like to congratulate Harold Dominguez on being offered and accepting his new position as city manager. But I also wanted to thank Dale Rademacher for your service for the city. You got a phenomenal interview, and I appreciate you tossing your hat in the ring. You're awesome. You do a lot for the city, and your name kept popping into my mind as I heard the water presentations. We need you, and thank you for your service.
Hear, hear. On the 27th, I had the opportunity. Mayor Coombs was actually invited by the Colorado American Legion to speak. The swearing in of it was definitely more than 70 future Army soldiers at the Plaza Hotel. Unfortunately, Mayor Coombs was unable to attend, and he asked me to go in his stead. This event was tied in as a swearing in for those future soldiers, and a covenant was signed, which council passed last week, and I'll just read that real fast. Together we committed to building strong communities. We, the community, recognize the commitment of soldiers and their families are making every day. The strength of soldiers comes from the strength of their families. The strength of the families is supported by the strength of their communities. And the strength of the community comes from the support of employers, educators, civic and business leaders, and its citizens. We, the community, are committed to building partnerships that support the strength, resilience, readiness of soldiers and their families. It was a very well-attended event. Senator Brandon Schaefer was there, as well as other military officials from Brigadier General Best all the way down the line to colonels and captains. It was a very inspiring event to seeing these young men and women getting basically sworn into the Army, as well as seeing the veterans from various conflicts and service there to show the support to those future soldiers. So it was a pleasure on my part to be there, and I know Mayor Coombs was looking to go there as well. So with that, I wish the mayor safe travels. And as Councilmember Witt mentioned, we will not be meeting next week, but however, we do have our team building event this Saturday, and I look forward to seeing everyone on Saturday. Councilmember Witt.
I do want to remind the public that we will be having a joint meeting with our Transportation Advisory Board and RTD officials Wednesday, the 8th. So if you can't get enough of council and you're just so upset about missing on Tuesday, please come on Wednesday. And I believe it's at the library. Is it at the library?
No.
Or is it here?
So the public safety.
Public safety. Thank you.
So yes, that is correct. Next Wednesday, the 8th at 7 o'clock, is a joint meeting with the RTD and the Transportation Advisory Board. So, Gordon, anything?
Mayor, just to remind you, if you have not turned in your evaluations of the retreat topics, they are due tomorrow. And Sandy will not be happy if you don't turn them in on time.
Eugene.
Mayor and Council, I wanted to give you an update on the oil and gas activities over the next 3 weeks. We will be releasing our background materials for the super committee meeting tomorrow. We'll be providing that to the boards and providing that a link on our website for the public. We will be holding a public open house on February 6th, Monday, from 4:30 to 6:30 here in the lobby of the City Council chambers, to be followed by the super committee meeting at 7 o'clock. That will be with the Board of Environmental Affairs, the Water Board, and the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. And that meeting will start at 7. We're not sure when it will end. We'll be releasing our draft regulations on February 10th in anticipation of the Planning and Zoning meeting on February 15th. And then finally for this month, on February 21st, we'll be having a City Council study session on those regulations. So we look forward to community's participation in those events and bringing it to Council on the 21st.
All right. Anything else? Thanks, Eugene. Well, with that, we're adjourned.